Welcome to the City Council meeting for Tuesday, September 21st. Ms. Hilbrick, will you please call roll?
Councilman De La Garza?
I am present.
Mayor Pro Tem Solis? Here. Councilman Crocker?
Here.
Councilwoman Scott?
Here.
Councilman Young?
Here.
Councilman Lofgren?
I'm here.
And Mayor Bucknight.
Here. If y'all would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing afterwards for a moment of silence. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And please remain standing as we prepare our hearts and minds for doing the city's business. Thank you. Okay, welcome everyone. Let's start off with announcements and reminders. Mr. Goosh, you have one listed on there, and then I have a couple.
Yes, sir. Mayor and council, just a quick note, it is in your packet as well, that tonight we will not be having an update on the animal code adoption. I'm begging off and asking for a few more days to respond to all of the feedback that we got. We've had over 1,200 responses to the online survey. We had 80 different people at the town hall meetings who gave us feedback and comments. We've had over 700 people hand type in individualized responses to the survey questions. It's going to take me a little while to digest that. Right now, I'm looking at the trees, but I need to be able to step back and see the forest in order to give you back some feedback about what the trends and desires of the community are. So instead of bringing that back tonight, as was mentioned at the last meeting, I'm going to bring my recommendations to you this Friday at the quarterly workshop that is already scheduled. And I'll get y'all's feedback based on those recommendations Friday, so that at our next council meeting, I can bring you back a draft for consideration. There is a mistake in the council packet, and I apologize for that. I wrote in the packet that we would come back as a second reading. The mayor reminded me this morning that y'all's consensus at the last meeting was that come back as a first reading again. And so we will essentially start from scratch with the recommendations of the community and y'all's feedback, and we will have a new draft on October 5th. If there are any questions about that timeline?
No, thank you for hosting those town halls.
I think they were very effective.
Yep. Mr. Garza, do you have anything else?
Not on our end, other
Okay.
than
Yep, I have one. I want to announce a big win for our communities. We are opening a regional infusion center. It will open tomorrow. This will be to, It's to provide the Regeneron I'm always terrible at this one, monoclonal antibodies. And it's, like I said, it's regional. It's going to be at the Mitchell School in downtown. And you'll need to get an appointment from your primary care physician or something if you need that treatment. It's going to be open from 8 to 5, 7 days a week. Governor was gracious in awarding us that, and it's through TDIM that they're going to be staffing it, so it'll free up some hospital personnel to focus on their duties at the hospital as opposed to doing the infusions. So excited about that. A couple other items. We have a soccer field at Riverside Park. Got the ribbon cutting at 5:30 on Friday. And then the city is also sponsoring a motorcycle cannonball this weekend. I'll make sure it is this weekend, right?
it's on Friday.
Friday.
From 4 to 7 at the mall, I
Mall
believe.
parking lot.
Mall parking lot.
Yes, by the former Sears building.
It's a cannonball run.
It's old
Yeah,
motorcycles.
Right, yeah, it's part
Vintage.
of a larger event that does have motorcyclists going through different communities, and Victoria is one of the
Okay,
stops.
excellent. All right. If there's no other announcements or reminders, then we'll go into public and employee recognitions. And I have one I want to start with. I want to congratulate Mr. Garza. He just got his credentialed manager designation from the International City County Management Association, and job well done.
Cool, thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome. Do you have any other ones?
No, sir.
Okay. Anybody, items from council then? Anybody?
I'd like to pull C10, please.
Yes, ma'am. Nothing else? All right. Citizens communication, Ms. Clara Ramos. Please remember, remarks are limited to 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm going to be short and sweet. First of all, I want to apologize for the last meeting, for me speaking out when I shouldn't have. But, you know, it's kind of hard to sit there and listen to something that was being said when I know that I personally have tried everything. And so that's why I had to kind of like say what I did, and I'm sorry. But I had submitted an appeal, and I haven't heard anything. I don't know what the process is for that, but I just want to make sure that the appeal does not go unseen, unheard, because what is the purpose of appealing if you're not going to be addressed? It seems like, to me, there is no... I don't want to use the word care, that, you know, people don't care, because I know they do. But I know that there's a lot of people that don't do what they're supposed to do. And I just want to know if we're one of those, in order for us to, for the awards, you know, to be getting lesser and lesser. And that's all. Really, this is not about the money. It's not. Because we've had this Memorial Weekend Bash for over 20-something years without any help from anybody, except for the sponsors that we rely on. But, you know, we just want fairness, equality, and that's what the appeal was for. I wanted to find out what is it that we're doing wrong, and I hadn't heard anything. I'm hoping that that I get some kind of response. I don't know how long it's going to take, but if someone could just give me a call and say, hey, we're working on it, or we're thinking about it, or we'll let you know. But I haven't gotten anything. So that's one of the reasons why I had to come back today. Okay. So y'all have a great evening, and please take that into consideration so that you won't push people away from, doing what they feel they have to do, like appealing something that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Mr. Von der Runt.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michael Vondro from 2204 East North Street, Lot 20A. There's a lot of abandoned trailer houses, and they've been abandoned for several months, and wanted to thank code enforcement and the developmental services and the City of Victoria for helping. They just smashed 2 trailer houses up the last 2 weeks, and Waste Management been taking care of the trailer houses, and a lot of these doors are unsecured, and it really looks trashy, and someone has to be responsible for them. And they're paying $285 a month lot fee, and they don't even live there. That's just money wasted. And the cost of tearing down a trailer house is about $6,000 a piece. And they've already tore down 2. And trailer number 10 is up for the Building Standards and Commission hearing on October the 14th. And I just wanted to thank the City of Victoria and Code Enforcement and Developmental Services for the help, and congratulations to Jesus Garza for his city manager certified credentialed person. I mean, it's such a long certification, I can't remember it, but he's legit, that's the bottom line. He's legal. Everything about him is legal, Thanks, and have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Von der Runt.
Thank you.
All right, is there anybody else wishing to speak that maybe didn't fill out a card? Okay, seeing no one, we will close citizens' communication and go into the consent agenda.
Item C1 is the adoption of minutes of the special city council meeting on August 31st, 2021, and the regular city council meeting on September 7th, 2021. Item C2 is a resolution approving the renewal agreement for 800 megahertz radio system support and maintenance with Motorola Solutions for $398,244.12. Item C3 is an ordinance increasing solid waste fees for hazardous household waste pickup and recycling. This item is on second and third reading. Item C4 is a resolution approving a professional services agreement with M&S Engineering LLC for design and project management of the community center dome HVAC in an amount not to exceed $130,000. Item C5 is a resolution authorizing the city's contract with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department for the Duck Pond project. Item C6 is a resolution approving the Selective Traffic Enforcement Program, or STEP, comprehensive grant. Item C7 is a resolution approving the citywide uniform rental services agreement with Centos Corporation in the amount of $135,000. Item C8 is a resolution approving an interlocal agreement with the Golden Crescent Regional Planning Commission for enhanced 911 services. And item C9 is a resolution approving a supplemental letter of representation with the Lloyd Gosling for water rights protest before the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality.
Thank you.
I move to adopt the consent agenda. Second.
Thank you. We got a first and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Passes. Item C10.
Item C10 is a resolution approving the change order number 1 to the 2020 rehab overlay project to Brandon Paving Company Ltd. for soccer field and Riverside Stadium parking lot improvements in the amount of $479,337.50.
Hello, I'm going to make this real quick to get down to the heart of the questions. This is a change order to Brandon Paving's contract. They're doing a rehab overlay project right now, and this would add the soccer field project to it as well as Riverside. Soccer field, the parking lot out there is in pretty poor condition. It's about 150 spaces we get. It's reconstruction, but I kind of want to define, because I know there's going to be a question about the reconstruction of it is a terminology that we're using on this one because we're regrading the base, but we're going to add some more base to it and then put a resurfacing on it. The rehab overlay, why we call those rehab overlays, and we will revisit it, is we're not ripping the street completely apart. We're not tearing up the curb. We're not tearing up the curb and gutter, the driveways, and everything else. So it's more of a rehab of the pavement, but we're also doing the base structure. Very similar, consistent with what they're doing in the parking lot of what they're doing in the current project. There's the location of it. It's the main one right adjacent to the soccer fields, about 310 feet by 325 feet. And the Riverside Stadium project, we're going to do something a little different. We want to take that parking lot and resurface it. This one we're going to use, fill the potholes in that are out there and do some of the minor point repairs. What we want to do on this is a microsurface, different from a seal coat in that it's a sand aggregate type mixture that they put on. It looks very similar to hot mix. You've got to do it on a good street. We've never done it. I've heard a lot about it from the world of asphalt and other places. And this is a company that does it. They've got a good reputation. These are some examples of what they've done in other areas. And this is what it looks like basically after it's been down a while. It looks almost identical to hot mix. And project cost summary, again, the soccer field cost is $329,000. Riverside is about $150,000, so it's a total change order of $479,000. And funding would come from the hotel motel tax. And timeline, this is the big one. We're trying to get these projects in before the TAF Olympics, which is coming in December. We also want to get it done in time for the next season for soccer. As you well know, these products are best placed when it's hot. To get it during the cold months, we'd have to wait until next summer or next, May, June to get them down. So our schedule is pre-construction in September, repairs beginning in September. I mean, we're gonna hustle. And then October begin on both of them. November complete it. In December, finish the striping. So it's an aggressive time schedule. And I'll entertain any questions. Yes,
I have
sir.
some questions. That microsurface, the Riverside Park has a long history of flooding. How's that microsurface gonna hold up to the hot mix or the asphalt that's there now?
It's still a sealant. It's basically anywhere from 1/4 to 3/8 inch thick. So it still seals what's there, and it's not going to degrade if it floods. It's not going to come apart. We're going to fix the base and the parts that are showing right now. We're going to get that leveled and fixed with our street department crews. But I've had them out there and looked at it personally. They sent both superintendents and said, "Is this something that can work and will last? We don't want it to be something that they go in there and it lasts 6 months." But they've assured us of the issues. And we've explained, this park floods, how does your product hold up?
What is it, because it's new, I'm kind of curious about it, because the use in a parking lot is different than the use on a street. Streets, the traffic continues
Right.
to move, and here the vehicles are just sitting. Is this designed more for that area, or
It's
just an area?
actually been used, they've used it, and a lot of other cities are using it on streets also. So it's an application that even highway department uses. So it is a product, it's been tested, vetted. They've really hit, I would say, North Texas, even further up into the outer lying states. They're just now starting to really push down here. Like I said, like it was 3 or 4 years ago, World of Asphalt. They came in, talked about it, but it's different than what you would see in a parking lot where you get a contractor and they almost just paint it. This is not just a paint job. It's got more subsistence to it, more binder, more asphalts.
Ken, do you have a life expectancy of these parking lots?
So it's be similar to a seal coat. It'd be the parking lot itself will last because of the base and subsurface. We'd have to do some maintenance on it in 7 to 10 years. I'm hoping longer because it's going to be not as much traffic. So
Second
expectations
question.
would be longer.
I saw your timeline, beginning construction, that's going to be during a current season down there.
Yes.
Do we have an alternative parking situation for?
There'll be area behind the Riverside, old convention center, that area, and then of course, back in the back. One thing we're gonna work with the contractor is, we know the weekends are gonna be the big events. Can you get to a point where people can drive on it? If it's dry, I'm sure they'll be able to. We went through that in the neighborhood to where we got everybody home. So I'm gonna work with them and say, hey, let's do our best to get it opened back up so they can at least drive on it and park.
Do you have a picture of the actual design of that parking lot?
Not yet. That's what I'm waiting today. Once we get, if y'all approve it, it's again up to y'all, then we'll go out there, measure it, and I'll get our staff and we'll have a parking lot layout actually of the spaces and how we're gonna lay it out.
And I ask because I believe one of the plans is to put food trucks on that, I'll call it
On the
patio.
slab.
Or the slab where the convention center was. Is that still correct?
Yes.
And they
So
would,
the layout of the parking lot's extremely important because we'll have a lot of children walking through that parking lot to that slab.
Right.
So we need to consider safety.
and we will. We're gonna, between our department and planning, who has seen a lot of parking lots, we're gonna come up with some different options out there and look at which one's safest. But that's crucial. But we do want to maximize the number of spaces out there, no doubt.
You may be able to come from that other side.
Yeah, the trucks will come in from the backside because the other side has got
But
steps
foot traffic
coming
may
up.
be able to come, there'll be a field up top,
And
possibly.
once we get to that level of specificity, obviously we'll share it with you, not a problem. One of the reasons, and we didn't really necessarily hit on it, but we're obviously trying to proceed with this project as quickly as we can, hence using the creative means of doing the change order. because we have the tournament that's coming in the spring, that'll host flag football on these fields, that'll also use a baseball stadium. And so we're trying to wrap up to take advantage over the course of the next 2 months of still having warmer weather. Because if we kind of bypass this year, we would have no choice but to wait till next summer, which would be after the tournament is in town. So that's part of the reason for using the change order mechanism to get this project flowing and moving slowly. I mean, quicker. Sorry.
Okay, I have a question on that topic. The change order is being made to another project that has nothing to do with this one. I just want to know, are we clarifying that? And I mean, is it legal to do that? I thought a change order had to be, like, we're doing a change order to Woodway. Woodway's got nothing to do with the park. So you tell me how we're doing this legally, just for, the sake of transparency, so somebody doesn't come up and say, okay, you guys, y'all doing something y'all aren't supposed to. That's what I want clarity on.
Ms. Solis, I'll answer that question if you don't mind. Excuse me while I clear my throat. We did look at this project to make sure that it was within the scope of what can be done under a change order. It is a similar type of construction that can be expanded, even though it's in a different geographic area. The legal standard is whether this is so substantially different that it constitutes a new project. And in this case, you've got the same company doing the same kind of work, and so I believe it is within the scope of a change order.
Okay, but I don't want somebody to come in and say, you didn't give us the opportunity to bid on this project, because I know it's similar, but that's what I want clarification on, that's all I'm saying.
I understand, and I think that's a reasonable concern, but we've looked at this project, and I'm confident that we're within the scope.
Okay. Yeah, because I understand the urgency of doing it, but I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that, change orders are for the project as it was supposed to be. Okay.
One question I had, you said that microsurfacing was new to the city. Does Brandon have experience with this material?
They've seen it in other parts, and they work with what we call a subcontractor, and it's Intermountain Slurry Seal, and they're the specialist with putting that product down. Brandon they'll be doing the preliminary work, they'll be doing they've got the final striping, but they work together real close, and we made sure that that was a big key to it, was making sure that we got a company that was the specialist in doing the microsurfacing.
That was my question, too. Thank you.
Anybody like to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve C10.
Second.
Thank you. First and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same
Thank you.
sign. All right, item passes. D1.
Item D1 is a resolution approving a cooperative purchasing contract for various computers, software, peripherals, and related equipment in the amount of $1,189,886.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm happy to be speaking about purchasing cooperative contracts today and the benefits they pose to the city by increasing efficiency and effectiveness. Cooperative purchasing involves sharing procurement contracts between governments. Now, the two main types that we have are piggyback contracts and third-party aggregators. Sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied this evening. Now, piggyback contracts, that's where one or more organizations represent their requirements, and they include an option where other organizations can bridge or ride together. And the third-party aggregates is where an organization brings together multiple organizations to represent their requirements, and they manage the resulting contract or contractor. Now, these purchasing cooperatives, they're relatively easy to administer. They make a wide variety of contracts available. It reduces the administrative costs and results in cost savings. Cooperative contracts also are especially advantageous for local governments because they benefit from the market share leveraged by larger government consumers. And by using specialized specification writers, procurement professionals, and technical evaluation committee members, governments can produce better contracts for higher quality products and services. Cooperative procurement contracts ensures that the contract has been done in accordance with state regulations. So essentially, with using cooperative contracts, we're still meeting our local government code 252, so we're within the law, we're meeting all of our bidding requirements. Now, the review process, once we decide to go that the cooperative method is our best procurement method, we still go through a review process. So we review for conformance with state procurement laws and best practices. We analyze specifications, price, terms, and conditions to ensure that we receive the best value. And we compare contracts. You know, there are multiple contracts available for the required product or service. And when buying in large quantities, we verify whether the contract permits negotiations of additional price concessions. Now, when you go to a cooperative, there's a price. And just because that's the price, it doesn't necessarily mean that is the lowest price you can get it at. There are some instances when you can negotiate a lower price. So that's just another benefit in case you weren't aware. Now, currently, the city utilizes over 10 cooperatives. For this item that James is bringing, we're utilizing these 5 cooperatives, which is DIR, TIPS, Buy Board, GSA, and Omnia. Do y'all have any questions on cooperatives or how they work? No? Okay, I'm gonna let James talk about the specifics of this item. Do you need more minutes?
No, fine. Thank you, Laura. I also want to I'll point out on these, this particular one, Texas DR would be a great example of a contract that we piggyback against, whereas Omnia is one of those where it's a one that we actually use. It's a cooperative contract. So again, this is sort of a breakdown as far as our contracts that we use. As you see, over 86% of our purchases are made through Texas DR. Now, even though we do use DR for a lot of our purchases, we still do a review process, not only prior to, but when we actually get ready to purchase. A prime example of this would be our computers. We don't necessarily replace our computers all at once. It's over the cycle, and just for the benefit of Councilman Crocker, is we do have a replacement cycle of 5 years on computers. And so when we replace them out throughout the year, instead of just replacing them all at once. So when we replace that order, we get the pricing from Dell for their particular pricing under the contracts. But then we reach out back to our Dell sales rep and ask again for additional pricing. And generally we'll see a small savings, usually 3 to 5% savings when we do that. But we do see a savings going that way. Omnia is the one that's another example. This would be one that we're using. I think we're using that one for our, is it NeoGov? I believe it's NeoGov is what we're using Omnia for. The majority of our purchases are under maintenance, so this is our software maintenance. So these are yearly recurring. For example, OpenGov, NeoGov, these are our software maintenances. And a lot of those are already, some of those well, I wouldn't say a lot, but some of those actually were sort of restricted to the vendor, and they may have just a couple of, they may offer it just through Texas DR. There's not a lot of other places that you can get those from. So 61% on software maintenance, and then 23% on our replacement equipment. And then lastly, the majority of our purchases are in IT. And so basically, again, IT is actually set as an internal service department. So a lot of the charges that can be charged out to other departments, or those charges are placed inside of IT, so then we can spread those costs out to the other agency, departments as needed. And any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Foote.
Thank you.
Anybody care to make a motion?
So move.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Item D1 is approved. Item D2.
Item D2 is a resolution approving a professional services agreement for the development of a Unified Development Ordinance with Freese and Nichols Incorporated in the amount of $249,634.
Good evening. We have just a quick presentation that I'll start off with. Just to give council a background, if you remember when we embarked upon our comprehensive plan, our 2035 comprehensive plan. The company that completed that plan for us also provided us with a development regulations evaluation report that was tied to the 2035 comprehensive plan. And that report did an overview of all of our current development regulations and overwhelmingly recommended that we go more for a user-friendly development ordinance. It's called a Unified Land and Site Development Ordinance. And so as that was the kickoff to our comp plan, and then as we went through our comprehensive planning process, again, throughout the document, but most importantly in our future land use and development section, we continue to have strategic action priorities and recommendations throughout the document that says that we need to go for a more user-friendly development regulations in a consolidated unified development ordinance. So tonight we're here to, it's long anticipated, ask you to award Freese and Nichols with a contract to help us create a unified land and development ordinance. If you also maybe remember back in October of 2018, there was a joint planning commission and city council meeting where we kind of talked about some of the issues with our current ordinance. The issues with our current ordinance are not so much our actual standards as far as setback standards or the actual regulations, although there are definitely things I want to bring up and discuss as we go through this process. But it's really the processes and the triggers and when certain permits apply. And as we talked about in that joint meeting, a lot of it has to do with us relying only on the subdivision authority granted by the Texas Local Government Code and not really dipping our toes into the zoning authority. And so after we had that council meeting and kind of discussed that we really need, as we update our Unified Development Ordinance, as we look at our ordinances, we need to really consider all the tools in the toolbox. And so when we went through the RFQ process, that was something that we really looked at as far as firms to help us be able to look at what's the best option moving forward for the city of Victoria. So with that, we did issue an RFQ back in March. We had an internal committee that was made up of Mike Etienne, myself, Celeste Menchaca, our development coordinator, Maggie Bergeron, our planning administrator, and Laura Gonzalez, our purchasing manager. And the committee conducted interviews on May 14th. We had 2 firms respond to our RFQ. It was a very tough decision after the interviews. We were really torn, we weren't sure, so we really did a lot of research as far as the references and follow-up questions. And that actually led to me bringing in Thomas Gush, and we actually did some Zoom interviews with some of their reference checks, their legal departments. And really what it boiled down to is when we looked at the actual codes that some of their clients had ended up with, overwhelmingly we realized that Freese and Nichols had a code that had developed codes that were much more user-friendly, that you didn't need to be a professional planner or an attorney to really understand what that code said. And so we selected Freese and Nichols based off of that. So then we began negotiations. And so tonight we're here to ask you to award that contract to Freese and Nichols. And I do have Chance Sparks, the project manager with Freese and Nichols, and he's going to take a minute to kind of introduce himself and his team and the approach or their history on developing unified development ordinances.
All right. Thank you, Julie. I'm Chance Sparks with Freese and Nichols. It's good to be back here in my hometown again. And really happy to be talking about plan implementation. We're very excited about the team we bring to this. We bring a blend of design professionals, meaning planners, architects, engineers, but also we bring a legal background with this. We have an attorney as part of our project team, Carly Kehoe. And we like to emphasize that we develop codes with the user experience in mind. We don't really think about it necessarily from the staff perspective, even though we all bring that. We think about who's going to be using this on a day-to-day basis. How do you make it easy to use, easy to understand? How do you paint a picture? And so we're really excited about codes in particular because this is all about taking all these planning efforts and turning them into something on the ground where the private sector is holding hands with you to take you towards that community vision, take you towards where the market wants to go. And that gets us really excited. We do take a phased approach to this. We start with an initial diagnostic, understanding what's going on with your codes. We go through a drafting process. We like to bring this into digestible modules. It's not nice to drop a big new code on you and say, please read this and approve. We like to feed it in little bits along the way, and then help you through that adoption and implementation process. So our whole team is comprised of people that have worked both public and private sector, both as developer, as consultant, and everything in between. We have proposed a 16-month timeframe for this, but you'll notice the contract is 24 months. We do that very intentionally because codes are hard. And we want your staff to be comfortable. We want policymakers like y'all to be comfortable along the way. So you have a diagnostic phase, code drafting, and then that adoption and training piece towards the end. And we have engagement that threads through this whole thing. With codes, engagement feels very different. For the public, it's going to be emphasizing how are they experiencing your city now, and what is their preference. We like to use lots of visuals for this. It's not nice to ask them about details of code. The average person is not real interested in the process for a replat. They're interested in their experience. But we also think about how we engage with those that are the professional code users. Lots of stakeholder emphasis within a code program typically. So we'll go through this diagnostic phase. We do interviews, we evaluate, and we go through alternatives and different approaches and how we're going to measure success. So we'll take an issue statement, develop some alternatives, figure out how we need to test these or if they need to be tested, go through that code drafting process, and if something weird happens, we go back and we check another alternative. We don't walk into this pretending like we're going to have every answer from the beginning. But it's a really exciting framework. We're excited about y'all's philosophy on development here. We talk about addressing the Z word, zoning. And that's a space that we're very comfortable in because we work a lot with jurisdictions that are not involved with zoning, particularly counties that don't have zoning authority, and urban counties where they have urban issues but lack that zoning authority. So we understand how to work with these different things. One of our first things is going to be educating on what you do and don't use out of that chapter of the code. You don't need a zoning map. You set guardrails early on, so that way everybody knows from the beginning, this is the destination we're heading towards, and we're gonna stay consistent with your culture, your market. That's really important to us. At the end of the day, we want developers and other design professionals standing here with us saying, yes, this is great, we like this, and we want community members saying the same thing. So this process is, again, iterative. We do these module drafts along the way. So you're kind of building a thing out of Legos and piecing it together. We have lots of check-in points, feedback loops, and we think a lot about what is your staff's workload going on at the same time. We know that they've got their day-to-day work. We don't want to become a burden through the code drafting process. So we think about that, how we break it up. We also like to get stakeholder verification along the way. Usually there's something that comes up. We have another question that we want to ask of a development engineer or something like that. We want to circle back to those issues. We place a really heavy emphasis on getting away from legalese. Apologies to the attorneys in the room, and focusing heavily on visuals to communicate, and tables and charts, things that people respond to well, that they tend to understand well. We like to be really concise, very visual. We love creating things like cut sheets where everything you need to know right from a regulatory perspective is on like a 2-page thing that you can hand somebody. We like to make it that level of ease. And then we want to take you through that implementation. We all come from places where we administered codes. So we bring a little bit of empathy to that process and provide some supportive training. Make sure the folks that you work with the most in the private sector are really comfortable with what they're seeing. And try to set them up for success with this too. And that's what creates a great track record of successful projects. It's why we're excited to be here. We do bring local experience here. We're conflict-free. So Freese and Nichols does not represent private development projects. We are trusted code experts with a lot of great experience, and we bring that 360 perspective. So with that, there's questions. I'd love to answer those.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You said you'd done it for 50 cities. Could you name some cities?
Let's see. So cities that we are working with currently, Georgetown. We've worked with Buda, Brownsville. We are now engaged for McAllen. Let's see. What are some others? San Marcos. We have worked with, let's see, Midlothian, Canyon, El Paso. and a few others too. That's just some that are off the top of my head. Some of those are going to be fully unified code. Some of those will be subdivision regulations. Some will be zoning. Working with Port Arthur right now too. That's another fun one.
Anybody else? I don't know about you, Ms. Scott, but I'm happy not to be working on this. It got very confusing very fast when we tried to do it in-house.
Does that mean we're not on the committee anymore?
No, we do want
Kicked
to
off.
continue to have a subcommittee that's comprised of council and planning commissioners. But yes, it's just too big of a project to try and tackle in-house on top of, our day-to-day jobs that we're responsible for.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to serve on the committee with the consultant doing the lion's share.
Yeah, my head was spinning
Yes.
when we started that process.
There's a big education.
Thank you, Mr. Sparks.
Are we ready for a motion?
Yes.
I move we adopt this whatever it is, this item.
Item D2.
This item D2.
Whatever.
Got a motion and a second. Is
Speechless.
there any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. All right, item carries.
Mayor, item D3 I'll read. It
Okay.
is the appointment of a council member to the Victoria Sales Tax Development Corporation Board of Directors.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I have a presentation prepared. It has all the same information that you have seen several times concerning the Sales Tax and Development Corporation. So
We don't have to go through it if you don't want
No,
to.
we can move forward to
Up to
the-
y'all.
Everybody feel comfortable with Sales Tax Development Corporation?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so these are the current members of the board. The resolution before you tonight will fill the council member vacancy on the Sales Tax Board of Directors. The vacancy occurred when Mayor Bachnight was elected in July, switching his position on the board from a council position to the mayor's position. So the unexpired term will expire in December 2022. And so you just need to nominate one of the other fellow council members, and then we can vote on that position.
Nominate Dwayne Crocker.
I second that.
All right. Any other nominations?
Are we going to ask him if he's willing? Or they're not?
Really, man?
He doesn't know that yet. He doesn't get a choice.
Yes,
told him-
I am more than willing. I'll answer the question.
I told him we were going to wait till he missed his first meeting and we were going to load him up. Thank you for being willing to serve, Mr. Crocker.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, thank you. Item D4.
Item D4 is a resolution reappointing or appointing 3 members to the Victoria Development Commission Board of Directors. So that is my item again. And this presentation is one that Mike and I actually presented last summer in 2020 concerning all the different economic development boards and their use to enhance economic development, especially through the 2035 Comprehensive Plan and its implementation. So I included the same presentation in order to kind of re-educate you guys on this particular board. So we could go through this presentation again, or if y'all feel comfortable with it, we could move forward with the voting process to elect a new board.
You good?
I'm good.
You good? You good with it? We haven't used this very often, Mr. Crocker, but
Yeah, it's
plan
been-
to look into
Yes,
possibilities of using it.
Yes, it's been pretty
more in the
dormant,
future.
but like I said, it would help with economic development if we should need this board. So it's good to keep it up and going. So.
This is the one that
a
you want
very
to fight to
coveted
get
board.
on.
So the board is composed of 3 members. They're all city council members, serve 2-year terms, then they can be reappointed. So currently, Mayor Bachnight, Mayor Pro Tem Solis, and Councilman Young serve on the board. And so our recommendations will be to go ahead and elect a new board or reappoint those if they choose to be reappointed. And then we could move forward with, as we are in good standing with the Secretary of State, of updating those records, and they would be available for use if needed, so.
All right. Well, I'm willing to be reappointed.
I'm willing to be reappointed.
I will as well.
Well, that is a whiz-bang, wonderful-looking organization there. We've got the mayor pro tem. And we have a wonderful council member.
It's the 3 most tenured.
That's right.
There,
That's
yeah.
true. There you go.
We fought to get on this because we meet once a year.
Not
I'll move
anymore.
in.
So move.
All right, got a motion?
Second.
All right, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign? Great.
Item D5, I'll read it. We're taking turns here. Authorize the city manager to enter into a representation agreement with Bojorquez Law Firm to provide redistricting services in an amount not to exceed $75,000.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. I want to start by saying that Mr. Garza has said we're moving way ahead of schedule, and I can take as much time tonight as I need to. I actually wrote this presentation expecting it to move very quickly, so I really have very little to go over tonight. We're going to start with the census results that were just released in the last month or so. And we're going to wind up talking about redistricting. That's the goal of our presentation tonight. And you can see from this bar chart showing the last three decennial censuses in 2000, 2010, and 2020. And I want to thank Julie Fulgham and Maggie Bergeron for the work that they did in compiling all of the information, all the data that's in this presentation. They're numbers people, I'm not. So I'm glad to have them here. But you can see that we've got a steady growth pace since 2000, 5% over the last 10 years. And our current population is now going to be 65,534 people. Looking at that data, it tells us that at least by preliminary analysis, that we need to be considering redistricting. Redistricting, as you know, is the way that we protect the one person, one vote system by redrawing the political lines in order to ensure that the representative districts have equal or nearly equal populations. It's required under the federal constitution, the federal and state law. And we also must make sure, and this is the more complicated part of the analysis, that the lines that are drawn on the map don't have the effect of denying or abridging the right to vote based on the basis of race, color, language group, and other criteria. And so you get into a demographic analysis pretty quickly, and the process is very complicated. As you know, these are our four current council districts. District 1, held by Rafael de la Garza, District 2, held by Josephine Solis, are on the bottom half of the map. Then you have, starting from the top, District 3, Dwayne Crocker, and District 4, Jan Scott, are all single-member districts. And for the purpose of tonight's conversation, we're going to be talking primarily about the single-member districts, not the super districts. As you know, the two red districts on the bottom, the south side of the city, numbers 1 and 2, are combined to create Super District 5, held by Dr. Andrew Young. And the two gray districts on the northern half of the city, 3 and 4, are combined to create Super District 6, held by Councilman Mark Lofgren. So that is the current setup. It's established by our charter, and the lines were most recently drawn 10 years ago after the 2010 census. What we have to do now is we have to look at whether or not those lines accurately divide the city's population so that we're protecting one person, one vote. Here's how we look at the math. There's a 10% threshold we have to keep in mind. Step 1 is you take the voting age population of the entire city, you divide that number by the number of representative districts to come up with the ideal population of each district. So you take the total city population. We're looking at voting age population now, that's 49,113. You divide that by the single member districts, that's 4 districts, and you get an ideal population of 12,278. In step 2, we take each individual district's population and divide it by that ideal population in order to find what we call the relative deviation for each district. Then we express that in terms of a percentage. So using District 1 as an example, there are 11,111 people of voting age in District 1. That's not a typo, that's actually how it turned out. You divide that by 12,278, which is our ideal population for each district, and that results in 0.9049. I told you all I wasn't a numbers person. You express that in terms of a percentage, and we would call that a negative 9.51 relative deviation. Step 3, you take the difference between the largest and smallest relative deviation, and that number becomes your total maximum deviation for the city. And that number, the TMD, cannot exceed 10%. Okay? I know that's horribly complicated. It's math. Or at least it's complicated for me. Some of you may not have a problem with that. Here's how it plays out in all 4 of the single-member districts. You look at the individual voting age population, and you compare that to the ideal population, and the math results in those relative deviations, 9.51 for District 1, 9.69 for District 2, a positive 19.96 for District 3, and a negative 0.77 for District 4. In order to find the total maximum deviation, you're comparing those two numbers, and the difference between those two numbers is 29.65%. And even I can do the math to say that's higher than 10%, okay? So that's what I mean when I say we've done the preliminary analysis and it shows that we do need to redistrict. I started off also by saying it's a complicated process, and I am recommending that we hire an outside firm to lead us through the process of actually doing the redistricting. I'm recommending the Bojorquez Law Firm. Alan Bojorquez is the managing attorney for that firm. They are one of the leading municipal firms in the state. They have 26 lawyers in 8 offices around the state. They represent 170 plus cities and other local government clients. They have done redistricting in the past for 19 cities, including Arlington, Beaumont, Bryan, Denton, El Paso, Galveston, and in several smaller ones as well. If you are to approve the resolution tonight to hire that firm, we will be working primarily with Resin Pullum and Mary Kay Spellman, who would be leading the project work for us and working with their demographer, Jeremy McMahon, to actually draw out the lines on the map. We get down into GIS files, we get into the individual voting precincts, and all of the things have to work out math-wise. And so it's an extensive process. We also are dealing, unfortunately, with a compressed timeline. The deadline to get all of this done is 90 days before our next election. That means this has to be finalized by February 1. If we approve the resolution tonight, then during the month of October, we will have the Bojorquez firm here with us at both of our city council meetings. First, to do some basic training covering the law and best practices, and then on October 19th, they would bring in their formal initial assessment report. That will be on firm letterhead, and that will be the report that says, yes, you do, or no, you do not need to redistrict your boundaries. We can rely on that letter going forward. And obviously, we expect it's going to say we do need to redistrict. So during the months of November and December, there are a lot of items listed there that need to happen. I'm going to recommend tonight that you consider appointing a committee to run this process and to bring those recommendations back to council so that council as a whole is considering the recommendations and the individual decisions that need to be made without necessarily having to be at every one of those meetings that's going to be taking place during November and December. If council as a whole has to do that, it'll require us to call many special city council meetings in order to meet the deadline that we have to meet in February. So it's my recommendation that we consider what some communities call a task force, or we could call simply a redistricting committee. That could either be a subcommittee of council members, or it could be a citizen-appointed committee, similar to what is currently being run for the charter reexamination. So that's my recommendation tonight, is that we look at an individual committee to make that happen. That's my presentation tonight. Are there any questions?
I have a question, and I just thought of this when you said it. The precincts can't be split between part of it and District 1 or part in District 2, or can they?
I believe you're correct, that you have to redraw the lines along the voting precincts. Also, we have historically made sure that our voting precincts line up with the county's voting precincts. And so there's a lot of coordination work that happens.
So is there an ideal size that you're supposed to have for each precinct?
For each voting precinct?
Uh-huh.
That's a good question I don't know the answer to. I recommend we hire an outside firm to.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because if you notice, if you go through all the precincts, they're not all there.
No.
Like,
Right.
We don't have 33.
Not within the city limits, right, because those are all in,
Well,
it's
not
countywide.
just, not just that, some of them are huge and some of them are really
Are real
small.
small?
Geographically.
And in some, well, voter, geographically and voter-wise. And I'm curious to see how this develops. Like District 3, for example, has a few precincts and they're all pretty big. So how are you
Three,
gonna take out District 3? I mean,
Assuming you guys are going to approve this resolution this evening,
discussion.
I will make sure that I pass that question along so that it can be answered as part of that initial training.
Okay.
Thomas, who did we use in 2010? Did we use anybody?
We used Allison Bass, the firm out of Austin. They represent primarily counties, and we used them because the county had already hired them to do their redistricting. There's a couple of reasons I'm recommending something different this year. The first is that, as I say, the counties, Allison Bass deals primarily with counties, and that's their primary focus. Alan Bojorquez, on the other hand, deals primarily with cities. The second reason is because our timeline is much shorter than the county's timeline. As I understand it, the county's deadline is also 90 days before their next election, but their next election isn't until November. And so that means that their deadline is different than ours is.
They have primaries.
They do have primaries, and I understand there's quite a bit of discussion going on at the state level right now about how to handle that. I don't think that issue's been resolved yet.
I think they're going to push primaries to June, but that'll be their next election.
Yeah, and so if they push primaries to June, then their deadline will still be after our deadline. Things don't line up quite the way they normally would.
So we're having
Redistricting?
our redistricting separate from, or does it have to coincide with the county?
It does not have to coincide with them. We historically have done that. And one of the first steps that you're going to be asked to consider is, what does an ideal map look like? And the committee, the professionals are going to be taking your advice about what they should be trying to draw. And one of the questions will be, do you want to line up your lines the same way that the county lines are drawn up, the same way the city council lines are drawn up? One typical concern in that initial assessment or that initial guideline is we want to draw our maps to make sure that none of our sitting council members get displaced from their district. You know, that's an acceptable consideration to look and make sure that our current city council members stay in their district and we don't redraw somebody out so that they are no longer in their seat.
So does that mean they take into consideration where we live?
Yes, ma'am, they do.
Because that's the only thing that could throw us out of our district.
That's right. That's right. And that is the question they will ask you is, do you want them to consider that when they're drawing the maps? And in most communities, the answer is yes.
So just so I'm clear, so the precincts, we're not talking about changing precinct lines. We're talking about leaving that the same. It's just which precincts are in which district. Is that accurate?
That's my understanding, yes. And I want to clarify, when you say precincts, you mean voting precincts.
Voting precincts,
Not
yes.
county commissioner precincts.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Okay.
But you don't think we're going to be redrawing precinct lines? Don't know? Okay. Hire somebody.
But
Okay.
that is a possibility. And I guess my question is, that is a possibility to do as part of this process, is redraw a precinct line?
Let me bring that answer back to you. I'm not
Okay.
sure of the answer, and I don't want to misspeak tonight.
That's
Okay.
fair.
Would y'all like to do a committee of three of us, or would y'all rather have a public?
Personally, would like the public.
I think this is a big enough issue that I think there's people in the public that
Yeah,
want and need to be involved. I mean, this is a big issue for the city.
Yeah.
If we do public, do you want larger than the three that we would have done with council?
It could also be a mix. So, I mean, you could
Sure.
always plug in a subcommittee of council members plus members of the public too.
And I think that it would make sense to have representatives from at least the 4 single-member districts so that the entire city is covered. right? I think that's one way to look at it, is just make sure that we have some spread around the community. But it's also an equally valid idea to have one member from each district and have 7 members on the committee, much like we have for our charter review committee. In fact, that may be the best way to make sure that everyone's interest is represented.
Or just let the super district folks figure it out for everyone.
Because they don't care where the lines are as much as the single district people do.
I mean, I personally don't think I should do it, because I would, if I decide to run again, I mean, the super districts and the mayor are up for reelection.
Right.
And I think the district members should be the ones that are on the committee if we're going to do a mix or how we're going to do it.
Well,
Or just have the 4 single-member districts appoint somebody.
I like that idea.
And
like we
maybe,
did.
and the mayor, and then.
There you go.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, like we
do that.
did for the,
Or It'll be a committee of 5 then.
A committee of 5.
Yep, and we'll, districts 1 through 4 will pick a representative, and I'll pick one.
And I think I heard a willingness to allow council members to choose to serve on the committee if they desire to
Yeah, you can
serve
appoint
themselves.
yourself.
Yes.
Right.
And we need those names in,
If you can get those names to me, and let them know, obviously, so that they can attend the next council meeting on October 5th, when we have that initial training session, that would help make sure that we don't have to duplicate that training for the committee itself.
Can you kind of repeat what you envision the workload or the responsibility of that committee to be in terms, I mean, I don't want to ask somebody and not tell them you're going to have to go to 2 meetings a week or whatever it's going to turn out to be.
Yes, ma'am. And I'm not sure exactly how many meetings will be involved, but the work that needs to happen is that council here will consider what are the criteria for what that acceptable map looks like. And then the demographer is going to go out and create some illustrative maps for consideration. And then they will have meetings where they review those illustrative maps and compare it to the census data in order to make sure that all those criteria that council cares about are being met. And then the firm recommends that we have some community feedback sessions as well, where the community gets to come in and give feedback to that committee about what the maps should look like and whether the illustrative maps are meeting those needs. Then finally, that committee, working with the demographer, would make a report back here to council for council to consider adopting those maps. So we're probably talking about 2 to 3 to 4 meetings during that time period.
Thank you.
Sure.
all right? All right, so we still need a motion and a
moved.
second.
Second.
Right, I got a motion and a second on item D5 to approve it. All those in favor say aye.
aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Goosh. I'm going to open up citizens' communication again. I have a gentleman that was late, and if you'd like to come forward and speak, that'd be great. And remind you that you have 3 minutes in the interest of time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and I really, really do appreciate that. I know you didn't have to do that. My name is Bob Coleman. My wife and I moved here from California 4 years ago. We went looking for the best town in America to retire to, and we found it. We love this place. We seriously love this place. And I'll give you a list of reasons, but I don't have time for that now. What we are worried about is that I'm ex-military. And I have been all over the country, the world, and I've never seen a municipality say how many pets you can have. I'm a pet guy. Yeah, I've been shot at in combat, but I'm also a pet lover, so don't judge me one way or the other. I'm a West Point graduate, and I've seen a lot of things, and I've never seen anything like this, that they're going to tell me how many pets I can have. I had heart surgery when we were still in California back in 2014. And my cats were they comforted me when I couldn't move. My wife spent last year in this wonderful medical facilities you have here in this town beating cancer. And our cats helped her through that. Now, I don't know why you're doing this. Our cats are inside cats. We never let them out. There's cars and fleas and ticks and now the government out there, they're going to threaten them. And it's just not right. But we never let them out. They don't influence our neighbor. Our neighbors don't even know we have that cats. We have 7, I'll admit it. And there's Abbott and Costello, who are our first cats that helped me through my heart surgery. And there's Laverne and Shirley, who came on after that. We love these guys and gals. And I don't understand, nobody's ever articulated how taking our heart from us is going to help anything in Victoria. Victoria doesn't need a lot of help as far as I'm concerned, because this is a great town. And I think I can visit that with you anytime you want. But for somebody to come in out of nowhere and say, we're going to take your pets, I'm sorry. I've been to Iraq. I've seen what tyranny is. And this is the worst tyranny I've ever seen. That's about all I have to say. I just wanted to voice the fact that I didn't do anything wrong. My cats didn't do anything wrong. So why are you doing this? There's no cats making diseases and all kinds of... I live in Castle Hills, and it's a nice place, and nobody's making a mess or messing with anything. So I just urge you to do what's right. Thank you for listening to me. I know you didn't have to.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you. We appreciate your comments, and I think you'll be pleased with the progress we're making on that.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. All right, this time I'm going to close citizens' communication, and we're going to have a city manager report on the downtown master plan overview. Yay.
I will
Ms.
turn
Williams.
over to Danielle Williams to introduce the topic. She's done a great job spearheading the process, so I'm sure she's really excited about it.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Tonight I have with me a couple of folks that have helped along the way. I have Chance Sparks, who is the project manager with Freese and Nichols that helped put together all the Victoria Downtown Master Plan components. And I also have Travis James, who's the vice president of TXP, who will go over the market analysis and the financial incentive package or toolkit that hopefully we can create later down the road. So I'll hand it over to these guys.
All right, thank you, Danielle. Happy to be back here again, and happy to be reporting back to you on this downtown plan process that's been going on. Everybody's been saying they've been preparing these presentations to be very, very short and quick. There's no quick way to tell the story of downtown, unfortunately. We're going to try to be efficient with this, but also want to make sure you've got great opportunities to ask questions, comments, things like that along the way. So this was building upon your comprehensive plan. You may recall some of the key things out of that was emphasizing downtown revitalization. Some follow-up plans from that included a fiscal analysis that was prepared by Verdunity. That, among other findings, pointed out that your downtown area is your highest fiscal return. That's why we're even doing this plan, really, is that this is the place that's getting your best bang for the buck. So let's make sure that we're not just cruising with that, but can we make it stronger as we go forward? So we're looking at some revitalization approaches, looking at physical, cultural, and economic strategies.
Yeah, and if I can interject really quickly, even just looking at the redistricting process, right? Clearly, no surprise, our community is growing to the north, and even more of a reason why we need to be more engaged and involved in creating better balance of development throughout our community, and downtown plays a key role in that as well.
Thank you. So when you see this plan document, you're going to see 5 big pieces to this. A snapshot is economic development and market analysis component, vision and goals, the master plan itself with the catalyst projects, and then an implementation capital program. When you look at this, especially implementation, we think about big picture projects, but also little things that you can do along the way. We like to balance it in both directions. First step of this is defining your study area. This is the first thing we did, because if you're trying to create some momentum, you got to have a lot of focus. So we took the larger study area and then defined kind of this core area where we see the most activity, where it's the most walkable, and build from that. From there, we built an engagement plan, had some surveys, website content. You had an outstanding advisory committee for this that built off of your Main Street Advisory Board. And we had a ton of incidental stakeholder meetings. So what tended to happen is Travis and I would come down here for one thing, and then we'd catch maybe 3 or 4 stakeholders while we were here along the way. And that really gave us some great conversations. We were able to meet people in their own spaces, which was nice. It's the best way to engage people. But overall, a great feeling. Had some great public events. Most recent one, of course, being the Art Walk, but before that in March, the big market day that was done there. And that was, we had a great time. We enjoyed talking to people, got great information, tons of participation, saw lots of emphasis in this on public spaces, tourism, but I'll also caveat that by saying people were interested in tourism, but they were interested in serving locals first. You're going to hear that a couple of times today. Arts and culture, connectivity and safety, and housing. Housing is one of those overlooked things within downtown planning that we really want to emphasize. Got to understand where you're coming from as a community. So your downtown, starting from today, doesn't have this big projected population and employment growth. It's going to generally kind of mirror what's going on citywide. A contrast to that would be some of these really fast-growing cities where a lot of the growth just ends up in downtown because the growth's happening everywhere. Y'all are a little bit different scenario. That means you're going to have to be proactive in how you create demand, creating local demand, creating attractive demand. And but you do have some things that you are going to be the envy of other downtowns. You have a stable daytime employment base. That is huge. That is usually the hardest thing to solve. Y'all are getting to solve the fun thing, which is how do you create an entertainment and nightlife perspective in downtown. And residential projects are going to play a role. They're going to be smaller in scale typically, and increasing your tourism is immediate opportunity. You have tremendous cultural assets here. I haven't looked at what your artist per capita is, but you have a lot of artists in this community. That is great. We saw this interest in focusing on retail, restaurants, and entertainment, both residents and visitors. Quality high-speed broadband is going to be a big part of the economic equation in downtown. And new infill residential projects, you're probably going to need some initial financial support to get those past the pioneering stage. And you also have a lot of publicly owned properties. Those are huge opportunities because if you can bring land to a conversation, that changes the whole risk framework for development. So let's talk about the illustrative plan. So we started this off with a character area map. This is interesting in a city like Victoria because you do not have traditional zoning. It's kind of nice for a downtown because downtown's developed before zoning was a word. And so we kind of get to see this organic framework here. So we're talking about strengthening your core area around De Leon Plaza, using your transition area for some growth and new opportunities, and then thinking about how you preserve and protect the traditional neighborhoods that surround so people continue to be comfortable in this space and can be part of the conversation. From there, we created an illustrative plan. This identifies really the transformative outcomes that we're seeking and establishes what those catalytic actions are going to be to get you there. You see this broken down in some different types of uses. Again, this is not a zoning map at all. This is simply identifying what we think makes sense. You'll see a couple of interesting things on here, including targeted upper floor activation. Basically, you have a bunch of second floors and third floors that are going largely unused or underused. Those are huge opportunities in your downtown. And then thinking about some infill opportunities, mixed use spaces, things like that. You're going to hear us talk about some specific uses on sites. For example, we'll talk about a hotel, for example. We'll also tell you that could just as easily just be a mixed use project or some commercial opportunity. Don't tie yourself down to it. So what you'll see here is you'll see that there's not a whole lot of new buildings. So when we talk about downtown planning, it's really important to emphasize work with what you have. Don't tear things down. Use them. Make them something that's interesting and inviting. Now, there's plenty of infill opportunities along the way, lots of gaps in the teeth, so to speak, that are great opportunities that we want you to work with. But you have a lot of vacant spaces that you can work with that are really lending themselves to interesting experiences. We have looked at primary corridors for streetscapes. When we think of a primary streetscape, this is like what you have on Main Street now with the nice brick sidewalks. That's what we would call a very high-end type of pedestrian environment. We want to see you kind of continue that throughout the spine of downtown and a piece of Bridge Street there. And some of those key cross streets, street trees are a good idea. If you have great awnings, those are also great. The name of the game here is shade. you need shade in your downtown. And really making it a really comfortable environment where people want to be. Your secondary corridors, these change just slightly. Instead of maybe having all brick, you have brick at the intersections and concrete for the rest, things like that, a little bit less expensive, and also sometimes easier to install in a lot of cases. And so these are usually your other key cross streets that reach out to Moody, Navarro, and then northward towards 700 Main. You want some street trees where possible, make some nice treatments, just make it a nice experience. People ask us what goes into making a good streetscape. Just make it nice, like that you would enjoy walking in. We look at places like Moody and 5 Points. You had some studies that were included within your transportation plan. So we took those and applied those within the downtown plan context for how do you make 5 Points work in a way that benefits the downtown and does what it needs to out of that transportation plan. What does that look like? When we talk about funding later, you probably start immediately thinking, oh, we're going to have to issue bonds and things like that. This is maybe a great project that could be an MPO-based funding source, something that's passed through federal, state funds. Great candidate for that. We think about your gateways and how do you show people, hey, make the turn into downtown. We have primary ones. These are your big ones, Rio Grande at Main, the rail underpass on Navarro, and then coming in from the south on Moody as you cross the river are your obvious primaries. And then the secondary ones are kind of those typical cross streets that you probably use on a daily basis to access downtown. Getting into specific catalysts, we'll tell you these are lettered and not numbered because they are not in order of importance, perhaps except for this one. This Main Street entry from Rio Grande is a great opportunity for y'all. It's a key gateway. It's the first impression of downtown. It's also where we see roadways in some of the worst condition. One of the things we've heard from people over and over is fix the streets. And this is a great opportunity to do that. It's that main corridor in. It can help prompt activation of some projects, such as maybe a mixed-use project there as you pass 700 Main. And this is also something you can look at for other grants. You have Economic Development Administration grants and things like that that are great. This makes a great candidate for that type of thing. And also thinking about, what is 700 Main Center like? It doesn't have to be a cold utilitarian building. With some small changes, it can really be dressed up. If you invest, it might prompt an adjacent property to transition into a different use in a new building, that type of thing. So that's what these catalyst type projects are intended to do. We looked at Mitchell School area. We think Mitchell School is really exciting. We see opportunities for cultural spaces, commercial development. It could almost be anything. It's a big site. But next door to that is Memorial Square. And what we thought was interesting is how few people seemed aware of it when we talked to them. That has great history. And so what we see here is enhancing that history and making it like a meditative type of environment. It needs to be respectful of what's going on there. One of our first recommendations, ground penetrating radar, understand where grave sites are, things like that. But make this a place that can be celebrated a little bit more for your history. Victoria has great history. It's the only city that was established under Mexican laws. That's really interesting and something that you should be excited about. We think about opportunities for...
Can I interrupt
yes,
you for a sec? On your previous slide, the Mitchell School, that is not a city building, correct?
Correct.
I've had several people ask me, I think they're to some extent not understanding that this is a vision, this is a dream, but this does not mean that the city intends to condemn a building that is not the city's building just because the picture is in the plan.
Correct.
And I'd like to have you confirm that.
Absolutely. That's definitely the case, that this is not owned by the city. This is a vision. What you might see happen is maybe the city thinks about what types of incentives would lead towards an outcome, or it's just simply sending a message to folks that might be interested in the site for, hey, these are ideas that the community has brought that they are excited about, and that can usually help with project funding and things like that.
Thank you.
Well, and it also helps send the message that having a more robust, revitalized downtown isn't just on us. right? I mean, this is really going to necessitate support and collaboration from other government entities, whether it's the county or the school district, the private sector. And so it also helps send that message that, hey, school district, this could be something you could help us achieve if you support the plan. And you'll notice in future slides that, we also make recommendations on county-owned property as well. So it really helps get more folks involved.
Yeah, one of the most important messages out of the downtown plan is you don't need to go it alone on this in any case, and you probably shouldn't. Looking at Site E, these are examples of when you're dealing with difficult locations like a railroad. Those can still be great opportunities, especially for small scale and craft manufacturing. You heard us reference all the artists that you have here. They're looking for studio space. Some of them work with very large media. You also have things like woodworking studios and things like that this can be an opportunity for. Welding studios, things like that, furniture making. These are all things that have really helped drive success in downtowns. We've seen this in Buffalo and Indianapolis, for example, both downtowns that were struggling. They've actually rebuilt themselves on a small-scale manufacturing base. Library development, thinking about the library, it's your biggest attractive thing for residents. So how can you bring that outside and leverage it more? So we've talked about adding a sculpture garden, shaded seating along Main Street, and looking at some type of retail component to this, a coffee beverage type of space, maybe a small outdoor performance space. Think about the programming that your library does now, and what would happen if you brought that outside? And how would people interact and experience that? And we like to provide the visual of what could that be like for y'all going forward. We think about the adjacency to the theater, for example. Could people go over here, have a cup of coffee, maybe some dessert, and then head over to the theater for a performance? That's the kind of experience we want to really try to create in your downtown. We thought about public parking. This is on a county site. We know one of the challenges with the county courthouse and all of its activity is parking. It's what causes really steep peaks and valleys in your parking activity in downtown. And so we saw this as a great opportunity. It's the right dimensions. It's a great public-private partnership opportunity where the city and county could possibly work together and resolve multiple issues all at the same time. It also has potential for phasing. You don't have to build the whole parking garage at once. You can build it in pieces. That's something that Texas State University did with its student center parking garage. It built a couple of levels first and then added 4 more about 10 years later. De Leon Plaza expansion. This is probably, I would say, the most controversial thing within the plan. And what we have shown is the most aggressive approach to this. What we're going to also tell you is don't go build this tomorrow. Test ideas. It's really important to test ideas on a big project like this. See what happens. See what happens when you do full shutdowns. We've seen that when you have the Christmas tree out in Forest Street and you had that closure. So we've seen what happens with that. So it means it's possible to do a full street closure. But you can do hybrids of this. It can be everything from something that remains open as a true shared street where you have vehicles and pedestrians interacting. It can be something that gets closed part of the time, maybe in the evenings, have some bollards that can pop up, that type of thing. Or you can go for a full closure. There's a whole spectrum that can happen. This also steps into the private space of O'Connor Plaza. So we're not saying go condemn property tomorrow. That's not nice. What we are saying is that the owners of O'Connor Plaza may have some opportunities. These are opportunities to create spaces that they mentioned as being needed downtown. They've talked about the need for restaurants for their workers and things like that. They can actually be part of the solution by providing small spaces. These can be kiosk type spaces with outdoor dining. You can have a fountain. You can have a active water plaza. There's a lot of ways you can approach this. We don't view this as stepping onto their toes. We view this as showing, hey, there's something you can do here that could be really special. We have talked about the public restroom and how to approach that. We've settled on within De Leon Plaza, looking kind of behind the Six Flags monument because you don't want the public restroom to just be out there like kind of punching you in the face. You want it to be subtle and discreet, but you also want to have good sight lines to where people are. That location has really great sight lines to where the activity typically is in De Leon Plaza. Look at adding maybe some playground space. We didn't mess with De Leon Plaza itself because it's a really well executed formal plaza. it's pretty special. Our extent of recommendations within that is looking at some different seating types, tables, things like that, that can make it more usable during lunch hour, things like that.
Before you go on, you and I have talked about the fact that the picture shows that Forest is closed, and I've got some concern about that, and I've been approached by at least one person, but who's been approached by some others with some concerns of the businesses in that area. And you've shared with me that there are ways that the street can be closed in terms of still being fully functional as a street.
Right.
But to indicate that it is more of a pedestrian-friendly area. And I'd like you to talk about that a little bit for the council, and also just any potential to have it open during the day and closed on weekends.
Sure. So there's a few. I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head for where I could tell you go visit this place, but approach you could take. Let's say you're wanting to keep this open, but you want that pedestrian feel. So one of the techniques we often use in design is bringing the driver up into the pedestrian space versus bringing a pedestrian down into the vehicle space. So that might mean raising the street where it's actually flush with the top of curb, but using bollards to kind of create some definition, so that way you can still do parking and things like that. But then the driver knows, oh, I'm coming up into a different space, different road textures, different kind of feeling. You can do some design that makes it feel like it's squeezed a little bit without losing function. So that's one approach. You could look at bollards that are just simply removable, or you can go fully with fully automated bollards where you just literally punch a switch, they go down. Those have different prices, obviously, so you want to scale it to how you want to use it. This is why we talk about test and experiment to see how people actually use it. But those are a couple of the approaches that we've used. And just using textures, tree placements, things like that that can really help show this is a shared space. That makes sense?
Thank you.
So
Can you leave it up that just there for a second? So you can see where the restrooms are behind the monument sign. You can see the restroom building. One of the things to note is obviously the usage of expanding, even in this footprint, it expands the sidewalk feel to add the picnic tables and really just create more of a sense of place, if you will, and a gathering place. And at the end of the day, regardless of what the design looks like, I think that's the big takeaway from this, is creating a space that people can gather on a more recurring basis and facilitate events and just really just more of an activation. Obviously, De Leon Plaza already has a lot going on, and we don't want to mess with that. So the only way to kind of create some of these spaces is to expand a little bit. And so if we were to do that, this would be the side that it makes sense to.
Would you make that a one-way street?
I mean, we could, there's all sorts of scenarios that we could consider when the time comes. But I think ultimately, we'll just have to make the decision at some point as to what extent do we want to go along that spectrum of fully closing the street versus partial, right? And obviously, there's a lot of things that needs to happen between now and the time that that decision comes, whether it's simply just, you all thinking about it, or simply just us pursuing with our testing. So for example, the Christmas tree is the perfect example, right? Because obviously it closes down the street for an extended period of time. Last year, we had the Christmas tree, and that was for the most part the only element that was there. But we are looking to expand, we're looking to bring Christmas on the square back as an example, which we really didn't have to its full potential last year. And so it'd be interesting to see the opportunities that exist where having that event while the street is closed and you have a Christmas tree, to kind of get a feel for what that space looks like. So there's some additional activation opportunities before we decide on it.
yeah, if you're looking for another city to, if you're looking for people to talk to, San Antonio, when they redid Main Plaza, went through this exact same conversation. And that was a hugely controversial action. They closed two sides of their Main Plaza in front of San Fernando Cathedral.
And in front of council chambers.
And in front of the council chambers. And that was a whole other conversation. But if you were to ask people today, most people don't even remember what it was like before. It's been very well received. It's a very active space, lots of things going on. They were able to deal with all the logistical issues, but they did it first by experimenting. They tested the ideas. So that's just a big takeaway I want y'all to bring from this.
Well, and that's what I'm kind of struggling with is, yes, we closed that street during the entire month of December, but for the most part, are you talking about all day, multiple day, daytime and nighttime festivals, or are you talking about something in the evening like the street dances that we have or things on the weekends? Because they're very different uses of that space. And isn't there a way that we can share it with the people that you said we don't have to solve the problem of having people downtown, we already have them. Let's not drive them away.
Yeah.
That's my concern.
Yeah, and I think if you do this right, you might find that those people maybe stay a little longer after 5. That's kind of what our hope is. So lots of options there, and that's what we just want you to emphasize is explore, have some fun with it. We did talk about a visitor center. I don't know where this is in the conversation, but the takeaway from this is a space that's across from, or it's behind the Junior League building. That's a Junior League building, right? Is that right? Yes, okay. So we thought this would be a great visitor center location. This could also just be a great adaptive reuse depending on what happens. The big thing is we really like this empty space that's next to it. It's just kind of a grassy space. And we love seeing small spaces that you can activate. These make a downtown feel really special, really intimate. People get really attached to these kinds of things. We did talk about potential new county facilities. So this isn't us saying, county, go build something tomorrow. This is, county, we know you have a lot of assets, and here's what we think might be a good idea for you to think about from what we've seen of your needs. So we kind of looked at, you don't have secured parking for law enforcement vehicles, things like that, where if you design a building correctly, you could actually create those types of spaces. We thought about the Continental Hotel building and how that might be really well suited for things like special victim services, things like point-of special advocates, juvenile interviews, things like that, where you actually want something that feels not so institutional, and how you can use those spaces. So again, our message to the county is think about how to use your land space. This is the southwest corner of De Leon Plaza. We'd love this location for a boutique hotel or a mixed-use commercial development. We're thinking somewhere in the neighborhood of 40-ish, 50-ish rooms. We think you've got the demand to support something like that that's a different type of product, and could actually help you hold that corner. This is kind of a gap in your urban design. 120 Main activation. So you already have a lot of conversations about this with Innovation Collective. What we've suggested is the special part of that building is its lobby. And how could you see about opening that up? Could you actually create like a food court, food hall type concept in that to kind of build on their whole, kind of entrepreneurial spirit that they're going for? So we think that could be a really exciting opportunity that can make a corner that maybe feels a little bit cold, warmed up again. You'll also see in this building, we're going to recommend looking at methods to bring buildings kind of back to their former glory. You see the Iroquois building with its architectural features up on the top. Those were lost in a hurricane probably, I'm guessing, 60, 70 years ago, something like that. So why not add a rooftop component to that? We're also really big on string lights.
What do you think, Dwayne?
Restored it to its former glory. Yes. I like it.
And so it's a neat space. And part of why we also selected this for a rendering, the Box Coffee place. That's a great example of getting very creative. We want you to think about in all policy actions, how can you embrace creativity like that in reusing spaces? Because that is a building I probably would have bet against. And that is a really neat space. We see this area, and it's a southern property owned by the county, is a great mixed-use development opportunity. This could be something pretty large scale. It's a whole city block. Which makes it very, very, very interesting. But we also think about smaller spaces. And remember, we don't advocate knocking things down. The old Conti hardware building is not a building that needs to be knocked down. It's a building that needs a little love. And we think it's got some great bones to it. We also see some opportunities adjacent to, maybe add a small infill building with it. We want you to think about outdoor spaces in your downtown, places where people can bring their kids. They like to go with their dog, things like that. People can bring in their dog or bring their kid. They will spend more money. It's inevitable. Activating the ground floor of parking garages. So this is the 120 Main parking garage. It actually used to have businesses in that. It had a car detailing space and it had a motor bank in it. Those can be reused. We want you to think about things like small-scale grocery in downtown. If they can do it in Martindale with Good Things Grocery, you can do it in Victoria. And thinking about beer gardens, things like that. And then residential infill. We've just shown a couple of examples, but the real message is you have lots of residential infill areas that have a lot of opportunity. If it's a place where a house is already existing, can they add an accessory dwelling, kind of like a garage apartment or a casita? It's, if it's a really large house, how can that be restored? Maybe it can be a bed and breakfast, things like that. But thinking about residential as a key component of your downtown is really important. That is everyday customers for downtown businesses, service businesses. That brings us to financing and incentive strategies, and this is the guy that needs to speak to that.
He gets all the good stuff and then sticks me with how do we have to pay for all this stuff. Travis James with TXP. I helped on the market demand. Look, I think you need a dedicated stream of funding for downtown. And so incentives need to take into account the need to retain and attract businesses to downtown. You need to have a positive return on investment for the city and the community, and you need to appeal to a broader audience, right? You have a stable employment base. Things close down after people leave work. How do we get more residents to move downtown? How do we get those businesses to stay open later? And ultimately, you need a long-term revenue stream dedicated to downtown to help incentivize these projects when it makes sense. There are a number of tools available to you there. The first couple are really about you taking existing revenue streams, your 4B economic development sales tax, your hotel occupancy tax, and dedicating as much of it that makes sense to downtown over 3, 4, or 5 years so we know what we have to work with to incentivize those projects. The second two bullets talk about project-specific tax abatements or rebates that will be linked to a specific project. So if somebody builds something new, maybe they get a tax abatement. If they bring a new retailer or restaurant downtown, we'll rebate part of the sales tax that they generate. So again, the first two are about allocating existing revenue streams. These two speak to project-specific tax abatements. The next two are pretty common in downtowns. I was in Canyon, Texas last night, up northeast of Amarillo, working on a downtown tax increment reinvestment zone for them is follow-on work to a downtown master plan. And I'll talk about the details of those. That's dedicating future revenue streams to downtown. So not what you have today, but what you generate in the future. The second is a public improvement district. These are popular all over the state. These are an additional fee or assessment businesses in a geographic area pay, and they're dedicated to that zone. That makes sense. So the first one is you take existing property tax or future property tax revenue, you dedicate it to the zone. A public improvement district is an additional fee or assessment, popular in downtown Austin, downtown San Antonio, downtown Fort Worth. It's additional revenue paid for by the businesses and residents who live there. The last one.
Some communities have both.
And some communities do have both. So downtown San Antonio has both, downtown Fort Worth has both, downtown Austin has both, different strategies, and I'll go into how those would work in a little bit. Another opportunity, as Chance said, you have so many cultural assets in your downtown area. Could you apply for cultural district designation from the Texas Commission of the Arts? It's a statewide certification you get. And if you become designated as a cultural district, it opens up new funding streams to pay for cultural projects in the downtown. But you first have to go through the process of being designated. Okay, so those are a handful. Take existing revenue and dedicate it to downtown, project-specific incentives. I'll call it geographic or zone-based financing strategies. And the fourth would be to apply for cultural district designation. I will quickly go over what a TERS is. Stop me and ask questions if you have them. They are not a tax increase. Typically, cities, counties, hospital districts come together. They agree to put future tax revenue into this zone for 20 or 30 years that can be used to pay for projects in the zone. So everything you get today, you keep. It's about sharing future tax revenue based on growth. This graphic I use to depict it, so what you're collecting today is called the base. the future stuff, future tax revenue, we call the increment. You could dedicate it, it's most common for 20 or 30 years. You could set it for 25 years, you could set it for 10. 20 to 30 years is what most communities do. The orange is the increment. It goes into that special account. It's spent in the downtown area. When the TERS terminates it, or the council terminates the TERS, all the money goes back to general fund as if the zone never existed. So for a dedicated period of time, we're sending a signal to the community, developers, businesses, come to downtown because we're going to double down on reinvesting in the downtown. I call these the two rules, and I'll show you a map, a preliminary map that I think would make sense. The first is you can't have more than 30% of the zone be residential at the time of creation. And the second is you can't have too many TERS. So y'all aren't impacted by either one of those based on the zone that I'll show you. There's a formal process you have to go through. Why I was in Canyon last night is if you want to lock in the 2021 base value, you have to do it by the end of the year. So there's a little bit of a time crunch. If you like the strategy and want to move forward with it, we need to do the first 3 or 4 bullets on this slide before the end of the year. So if you put it in place this year, the first year's increment would be 2022, and that's not due until January 31st of 2023, right? Just the way the tax cycle works. So it takes time to build up. You need to put these in place before a project breaks ground. If you do it after the fact, you may lose that incremental growth. So it's a strategy. People put these in place. It does take a couple years for that increment to build up. Similar to other kind of boards and commissions you have a formal hearing, you designate the geographic area, you designate the increment you would contribute, the number of years. There's a preliminary project and finance plan, you appoint a board, they approve another plan, it comes back to the city council, and you still have control. But it's just a process by state law you have to go through. You then ask the other taxing entities to join. If they join, they get at least one person on the board. So it works like other boards and commissions that you have. So based on the work I've done downtown, talking to cities.
Just really quickly, sorry, can you go back real quick?
Sure.
I just want to kind of clarify on your point about asking other entities to participate. Can you just clarify the entities that would be eligible to join us and those that would not?
Right, so cities, counties, hospital districts, community college districts, public school districts, ISDs can join, but they changed the rules 20 years ago. As we talk about Robin Hood financing, they're not held harmless if they join. It gets a little bit complicated. The short version is very, very few school districts join because it impacts their state funding. So they can, most don't. So it's common to see the city, the county, maybe a hospital district join.
But if they join, it's not that their tax money comes to the city and the city gets suspended. It's that their tax money is still their tax money, but they spend it in the TERS.
Future tax revenue for all the entities that joined go into this special bank account is the easiest way to understand it. So we pool our resources collectively. We pay for projects collectively. They're typically public infrastructure projects, economic development. Maybe you need to acquire a key piece of property that you then do something with. But it's everyone sends their money to a bank account is the easiest way to think of it. And it has to get spent in this zone. And the specifics are worked out in that project and finance plan. Does that make sense? So it's a great way to bring everybody together to say we're going to focus on this area to fulfill these projects. They're typically not controversial projects or you wouldn't come together in the first place. It's the kind of nuts and bolts to help reinvest in a downtown or an area.
Can TERS issue bonds?
They can. You typically don't issue them until you have enough increment to repay the debt and the coverage ratio. So I worked on a 1,200-acre master plan TERS in Brownsville, and that's what the developer's going to do. The developer's going to take on the debt. Once the increment gets high enough that the city can issue debt, or the TERS, not the city, the TERS can take on the debt, it takes it on, and it's typically cheaper to finance. But in that example, the developer has to make those payments until you get enough tax revenue coming in to make that payment. Very few, if any, do trust us it's going to happen because you just can't get the financing. But some do after the first 4 or 5 years of growth.
And does the money have to be spent as soon as it comes in, or it can be accumulated to go toward a project?
Right, so it can accumulate to go towards projects. A lot of them will do downtown facades grants. That's what the city of Denton does. They use their TERS to pay for a downtown facade program because they don't have a 4B sales tax, as an example. Some build it up to pay for a project in the future. Some do grants. Some will do de facto property tax abatements. And since you're sending the money from the city there, the TERS kind of cuts the check to the developer to come up with a de facto tax abatement. So there's a number of strategies that people use as part of the financing plan.
Or a property tax rebate agreement is probably the better
Property tax
term.
rebate agreement is
Yeah.
probably a better term. So in San Antonio, if y'all know where the Pearl is, all the residential that was built around the Pearl, the city sent 100% of the tax increment to the TERS. And so the incentive policy to encourage new housing downtown, which is something you all should contemplate, the TERS made that rebate payment to the residential developer. So it just depends, but so some build it up, some spend it as it comes in, some issue debt down the road when they can. So here's a TERS that I think makes sense, that complies. Because you have so much residential around the downtown, it gets a little tricky. That's the complicated term, kind of like you heard about the voting districts. Roughly Nueces to the north, the south, it's multiple streets, Moody to the west, over to the railroad tracks. The question is, why do I go so far east? That Southern Pacific is like 3 or 4 blocks that's all counted as one parcel in the appraisal district. And it's typically easier unless you want to do a formal meets and bounds. By state law, you just have to define the boundary so folks can understand it. We typically do it with the map and a list of parcel IDs. So if you wanted to cut the railroad property in half, you can, but then you got to describe it as a formal meets and bounds. And appraisal districts don't like it. It's just easier to, it's either in or it's out. So that's why I send it so far to the east, for lack of a better example. The other thing I noticed looking at the historic data, your large office buildings downtown fluctuate in value as people protest those values. And so same thing happened in Irving. If you know where Las Colinas is, Williams Square, they put the TERS in place when one of those office buildings was full, and then an oil and gas company went out of business. And the first year, they actually went under their baseline value. So it took them a couple years to build out of that. So when I say baseline value, I'm going to jump ahead here. This is 61 million. So this sets the base. This is a 2020 value. I've got to get the 2021 taxable values, but the base is set, and so it's anything above the 61 million. If the city or county starts buying properties, we go below the 61 because they come off the tax roll, and then we got to work extra hard to get back above the 61. So the strategy is, if the city, county, the school district doesn't need property, let's create a TERS, let's then sell it, and let's get it taxable. So for example, the Mitchell School doesn't have a taxable value because the school district owns it. The day they sell it, it now shows up and we've generated increment because we've added value to the zone. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's a conversation with the county. If we've got surplus property, let's figure out what we need. City of San Antonio, I think this is low, but the City of San Antonio also used the TERS to pay for a parking garage at the Woody Museum. If you know where that is, up by Incarnate Word, up towards Hildebrand. And the way they did that one is the city built it, and they said if there's money left over at the end of the TERS, we'll use it to pay ourselves back, but we'll be last in line to get paid back, so we have increment to use for other projects. So as we think about different funding sources, it's how do we marry these things together to make sure that we have enough funding to pay for the projects as they make sense. Let me go back one. The other thing I mentioned is a public improvement district.
Hey, before we leave TERS.
Yes, sir.
I just want to stress that I think it's very important that we get this in place by the end of this year. And I would just like for us real quick to touch on it and make sure we give good direction to Mr. Garza if this is something that we want to go forward with. So.
I'm certainly in favor of it.
The TERS portion.
Yes, the TERS, because I think we need to get some help with it.
Yeah, get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely on a time crunch, if you will.
You just need to, and you just need to get through the third bullet. So we can, if you like the map and that's the direction, so let's work with that map. You can amend the boundaries later. It's better to get it right the first time. Once you start issuing debt, the bond covenants may tell you you can't change the increment. You can't change boundaries to make it harder for them to get repaid. So it's better to get it right. You can tweak it. We need to do preliminary project and finance plan. You have to have the public hearing and you have to approve it. And y'all take 2 readings? 2 readings, so you just sort of got to back out the calendar to make sure you got enough time. Most communities have the public hearing and they approve it on first reading the same night. So we got to do the public hearings, the postings, approval, unless you want to meet. Does that make sense?
Is that like an emergency reading? An emergency?
Yeah, we wouldn't want to approach it that way.
Yeah.
But we would just approach it the way that we would any other ordinance.
Yeah, what I'm hearing him say is we just need to build that extra meeting into the timeline.
Right, so some, it is a rush at the end. Others, they call special meetings. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we probably have 3 meetings worth of stuff and work to do. So we got to bake that into the timeline. So look at when you meet, figure out how to make sure the timeline works. There's still time. I don't remember if you meet twice in December, but I know there's still plenty of time to get there, but we just need to get going if that's the direction.
6 more regularly scheduled meetings. All right.
And then you got to post 7 days in the paper, and then they need something usually a couple days in advance, so you just got to work the timeline.
And we obviously would want to also take the time to meet with stakeholders, you know, include the Main Street Board, you know, in the conversation. So we would obviously want to do a little bit more than just what's the legally minimum requirement, because we would want to ensure, obviously, buy-in, and really ensure that folks are educated on what we're doing. And so that'll take a little extra time as well.
I'd like to see numbers.
That's part of the financing plan. So in order to get the financing plan, we would actually take the next step, and they would work to put the financing plan together. The scope of doing that wasn't included in the downtown master plan because we weren't going to assume that, you know, we were going to do it. And so if the direction is to proceed with the TERS, we would proceed with adding services so that they can take it to the next step and help us establish this. And obviously, we would include you all in that conversation.
Well, and you made the comment on your chart with the money, and then it reverts back to the general fund. You made the comment that it's when the TERS ends or when council ends it. So I think I took that to mean that if we were to create one and said, hey, this isn't worth it at all, we wouldn't have to be stuck to the number of years that we had originally set it up for.
Correct. Or if you set it up for 30 years and it goes great and you pay for everything in 20, then you could terminate it early.
Of course, unless we've issued bonds or something.
Or you could always just keep it going, too.
Keep it going. That's a lot of cities keep it going. And I'm in Austin, so I can come down as much as needed. I make the timing point only that most people try to tie it in with council meetings, that formal.
And to be clear, going back to the timeline on the bullet points of stuff that needs to get done, we would need to secure the other entities participating by the time we set it up.
They could join later. They could join at the beginning of the year. It's better to keep them engaged in the process so we can move as quickly as possible because they typically like to appoint their board members as soon as possible. So as long as the city establishes the TERS this year, the baseline's locked into 2021. If they joined at the beginning of next year, they joined through an interlocal agreement, they could also have a 2021 base value. To not lose momentum, it's better to keep everybody involved, talk to them, make sure they know what's going on, get their feedback. But this typically takes 4 to 5, I'd say 4 to 5 months, hopefully 4. But by the time you get going, get folks to join, maybe show up at a county commission meeting or the other entities that join, they typically like a presentation as well. So that can take 4 to 5 months.
We'll get ours in 3.
I like the way you think. I'm gonna hold you to it. You'd be the first.
World record.
Yeah, you'd be the first. So again, it's a pretty straightforward process. Let me ask this, does this TERS boundary make sense? I mean, knowing there's limitations about residential, have we left, and maybe this is appropriate or not, or in the next couple of days, think about it, chew on it? But
It would take me 4 months to come up with something different.
Okay.
Well, I would suggest that council, and I can always email it as a separate document, so it's easier to review. And then we can have a conversation about it at our one-on-one meetings, and go that way. That way you don't necessarily feel pressure to provide that feedback right now on the specific boundary.
But just think about it, if that makes sense. We can tweak it, add a property. You think, hey, something's really important to add, or no, that doesn't make sense. But I think that's the general boundary. The public improvement district, again, it's similar in that it's geographic based, but you get the property owners to agree to have a special assessment. And that money has to be paid and spent, or paid for the businesses in the zone. Sometimes it's done based on a per square foot. Sometimes it's an assessment as like a property tax, 5 cents a nickel, and the money has to be spent in the zone. That's not a full list, but those are the highlights of what the money has to get spent on. Use San Antonio as an example. If you see the folks in the yellow Amigos shirt, that's paid for through the public improvement district. Extra trash pickups. If you did stuff in De Leon Plaza, the businesses may create a PID to help maintain that, as an example, or help pay for programming. It's something to think about with everything going on.
Is this something that's usually set up on a more mature downtown or area versus one that's trying to establish itself?
A little bit of both. I mean, I think in Texas examples, they were set up as they were trying to come back. They either paid for extra security, extra policing. You see the folks on the bicycles, trash pickup. So I think it just depends. A little bit of both. Today may not be the right point. You don't have to do this today. As a city manager said, a lot of times the boundaries are the same between a TERS and a PID. They don't have to be, but they tend to overlap, so you just have more money. I mean, that's why you do this, is to have more money and more resources. So that's something that can be thought about. So here's what we think, and there's a lot more details in the document. I think property tax abatements for new residential housing makes sense. We got to drive demand to get those businesses to stay open later. Chance showed you examples of where that infill housing makes sense. No one's built anything downtown in a long time on the multifamily side, so you may need to incentivize the first or second project so it proves there's demand, and then maybe you don't incentivize the future projects. But it may make sense to incentivize housing. Downtown hotel, the same thing. You may have to provide some type of incentive to help that hotel come downtown. I think job grants for businesses that add full-time employees who work downtown makes sense, especially those that don't have to be there. I mean, if you're court-related or law-related, or you do work with the city, there's a reason you're downtown. How do we get more businesses to come downtown who don't have to locate in downtown? That speaks to broadband, software developers, diversifying the types of businesses that are downtown. I think the enhanced facade and building improvement program, you're doing that today. I think more of that would be better. And then long-term, 700 North Main, I mean, that's a long-term city facility question. That's in the TERS, so if the city moved those functions somewhere else, you now have a property that you could offer up as part of a redevelopment project or incentive. And then mixed use on the county property or parking garage. The county has a lot of property, and how do we work with the county to see what they don't need and try to sell it? The same goes for the Mitchell School. So how do we work with the school district to sell that property at an appropriate price so that someone can come do something in the short term? So with that, I'll turn it back over to Chance.
Could I ask a question before you go back to that?
Yes, sir.
You said people would be appointed, like if the county was part of the TERS, who makes up the governing body of the TERS? Who decides?
It'd be up to y'all, it'd be up to us when we set it up.
The city council, there's state law about the minimum and the maximum. Every taxing entity that participates gets at least one representative. So you could choose to have an 8 or 9 person board. You want an odd number. You all could each appoint one person. I mean, I work through the math, whatever makes sense. And then the county would get a person and the hospital district would get a person.
And some communities, even to not create a bunch of different boards, some communities, like for example, we have a Main Street board. And so you could theoretically have like a subcommittee of the Main Street board that represents, the non, I guess the stakeholders. And then obviously you have the appointments that come after that. And so it really is up to us.
And they don't have to be elected members of the bodies that are the taxing.
No, not at all.
No.
It's typically
Okay.
people who care about downtown, downtown advocates, and it's usually people who aren't going to come to the TERS asking for something. So there's there won't be a conflict. So it tends to be people who live in downtown, work in downtown, care about downtown, understand the importance of downtown. Those are the people you would appoint to the board.
And are there terms? Are they long-term, short terms? Are there limits?
Yeah, you would set terms, you would pick a president, you'd have to have the first one staggered, so you wouldn't have everybody rolling off at the same time. You would set up bylaws, and then, as I said, you can give them as much power as you want. So if you don't want them to spend any money without coming back to you, you can do it that way. Larger, more established TERS may say you can spend up to $25,000 without coming back to us if you need to hire an engineer or a surveyor or some kind of administrative function, just so it doesn't come back to the city council. But if you want everything to come back to you, you can set it up that way in the bylaws. So it just depends on the level of, oftentimes they'll say, look, there's a facade program, you let staff run it, but you all say how much goes into that program, as an example.
What have you seen as really kind of an effective educational component to this? I mean, it's something citizens got to get their heads around. I mean, what have you seen has been effective to really getting this out there and an effective explanation of how this works?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of the public hearing, which you post on the website, and city staff, your economic development folks, and your Main Street folks just promoting this as a tool that folks should come take advantage of if you're doing a development project in downtown.
I think you mean more of during the process of setting it up, right?
I do.
Oh,
Yeah.
I would say promoting when there's going to be the public hearing. There's typically not a lot of outreach to the community because it doesn't impact them and that it's not an additional tax. It's not an additional burden. Most communities just post it as normal. I'd have to think about how have other communities I've worked in kind of done an outreach campaign.
Well, and as I alluded to earlier, we would want to, include the Main Street Board. We would, probably schedule more than just the required public hearing. We could talk about it at, a partnership meeting. We could talk about it with the Chamber of Commerce. So, it's really just educating people because for us, it's probably easy to understand the mechanics behind it. But when somebody hears the term, tax increment reinvestment zone, we want to be clear that this is not a new tax or anything to that effect. And that's probably the one piece that, we really need to kind of, hit on, because we don't want people thinking this is something, on top of what they already pay. And the reason why communities, if having to choose between the TERS and the PID, one of the big reasons why communities do the TERS versus the PID is because somebody's not having to cut an extra check, right? Because if you set up a PID, you, for example, as a downtown, business owner might literally have to cut a check at the end of the year, to meet your assessment that's being required of you, right? Versus the TERS, everybody just pays their property taxes as normal. And behind the scenes, the appraisal district coordinates the transfer of the increment, accordingly. And obviously, there's an educational component that would have to go, or that we'd have to include with the appraisal district, because this would probably be the first TERS that we set up under this mechanism in our community ever. And so the appraisal district would need to understand, how that works.
Yeah, I
And,
think.
unfortunately, we have a great,
We had one a
member on the
long time
appraisal
ago.
board.
And then I have a question. The PID, how would that be set up? Do people get to vote on it or that are in that district? Because they're actually being taxed extra. Is there a different setup procedure for that?
Yeah, it's an assessment. Yeah, I would not use the word tax, but, because that's.
Okay, assessment.
But,
Is
yeah.
it kind of like a property owners association?
Yes,
It's
it's
not.
sort of like an
but-
HOA after the fact. Yes, if you're
Yeah.
impacted, you have to have a vote, you have to get a majority to vote for it. You have to have a plan every 5 years. I'm gonna say it works similar, but yes, you have say-so in being taxed or paying that assessment is a
And-
better way to say it. But yeah, it's like an HOA after the fact.
But it's mandatory membership within,
Once you get
within your
a
boundaries.
majority to be for it, yes, it's mandatory
Yeah.
in the zone.
And I think, regardless, or whether either of these are chosen by the council to move forward, I think part of that education component for the citizens, I think a big question is going to be, it's okay, I don't live here. I don't have a business in here. What impact does this have on me, if any? And I think that message needs to be made clear that here's what it does, here's what it doesn't do, here's how it impacts properties, businesses, people within that zone, and here's what it does or doesn't do to people who don't live in that zone. I mean, I think all of that is, it's a community issue that needs to have educational components that aren't just focused on this area, but focused on the rest of the city as well, and kind of have both sides of that equation so that people have a fair understanding of that, so that they can come to a hearing and say, okay, here's my opinion based on what I understand about this.
And we could do that, and other cities have kind of your FAQ page on what's a TERS and how it impacts you and how many TERS we have in a city. So I guess now that I understand your question better, that's how a lot of cities do it, by they have a web page that describes what it is. But you can also do an outreach component by speaking to folks in different groups that would be impacted beforehand.
I was just gonna say that on top of that, I would argue that it's not just about the TERS itself, right? I mean, we're already getting a lot of feedback just as we roll out the master plan and some of the images and, and we know we could do a better job of just educating the residents in general about why it's important to focus on downtown and invest in downtown. And so that, all of that is wrapped into just communicating our message better, focus to the broader audience to understand why downtown's important and why we're focused here. Other communities have multiple TERS, and so it's not uncommon to have like a university TERS to take advantage of growth around universities. It's not uncommon to have hospital-related TERS for the same reason. So this would be the first one that our community does. So it's going to take that extra effort for folks to really understand what it is and what it isn't.
No, I think so, and especially if it's the first one and we're talking about a compressed timeframe, it's going to be hugely important, in my opinion.
But I think those concepts are really good because we're about to have a drainage plan, and there's going to be some drainage issues that, these mechanisms that you're talking about could be used for financing some of that long-term.
Absolutely. I mean, if we had a university TERS, the university TERS could financially back, the drainage improvements needed around the university.
Right.
As an example.
And they set one up in San Antonio around Texas A&M, a Verano TERS to help fund streets and some infrastructure around that university. And council members, that's the second number. That's, if you have multiple TERS, that's where you can't have too many. You can't have too much of your tax base in a TERS. Y'all are impacted by the less than 100,000. So if you're less than 100,000, it can be greater. If you're a larger city, it's a smaller percent. So those are those two stipulations. I guess you can't have too many TERSes, whatever the plural of a TERS.
So we could put half the city into various ones.
I mean, you could. I don't.
Well,
I'm gonna have to think about how many. But I
Mike,
mean, the larger cities may have 8 or 9.
Mike, how many does San Antonio have?
San Antonio has 9 city-initiated TERS.
Wow.
Fort Worth has about 9. If you think the different parts of Fort Worth, Trinity River Vision, downtown, the stockyards. I mean, so you kind of use them for specific reasons. But then, as you know, they go away after 20 years or 25 years or.
So we're just looking at doing one before the end of this year, and then maybe we'll look at them again next year to add some others, or we.
Well, I mean, at this point, we're just talking about one.
Downtown.
Yeah, we're not even entertaining anything else. So we're just talking about one, and as has been alluded to, it'll take several years for us to kind of see that come in.
Right.
And so realistically speaking, we should obviously get having one right, to show people the benefits of having one before we even entertain a conversation about setting another one up. And so it'll take time to get to that point.
And if I'm understanding it right, the only downside, if you would call it a downside, to the rest of the community is that if there is some major project downtown that generates a lot of tax, the rest of the community doesn't get the benefit of that tax. It's more localized. The benefit of that tax is used more locally.
Well, I would argue that they do get the benefit of it because that money gets invested in their own downtown. And so everybody benefits from having a better downtown. And so I wouldn't, it's just, that would be my argument on that.
Yeah, I would say in
on that
most
part.
communities, the downtown TERS, because people feel like downtown belongs to everybody, downtown TERSs tend to be, I'd say, the easiest. Because people understand the importance of a healthy downtown and why downtowns matter. and they tend to be older and they just need help, they just need work. The other challenge with the downtown is if they're too old and too historic, you don't get a lot of increment, and so it doesn't make sense to put a downtown TERS in place. So as you think about this TERS, that's why we've drawn some areas where redevelopment and new development could happen on an empty lot, or maybe something could be torn down that's not historic, if that makes sense. You got to make sure if there's not going to be anything new, it doesn't make sense to put a TERS in place. So you got to draw it in a way that you're going to get net new. It's on real property, not personal property. So it's just on the real property in the zone. So I can talk TERS all night, but let me have Chance come back up here, and then I can answer any more questions you have.
All right, thank you, Travis. That was a lot of math. We also have a lot of other recommendations that go beyond the financing perspective. We talk a lot about other actions you should consider, thinking about how do you help people make good decisions with their properties using things like design guidelines? How do you make things easier for redevelopment, communalizing different things like grease traps? How do you approach things like communications and access, broadband, Wi-Fi? These are all things that are going to be important to your downtown. They all vary in cost. A communal grease trap, that's $10,000 to $20,000 probably. So those are easy things to bite off in smaller chunks. Railroad Quasi may be a little more expensive. Those can be $250 upwards to $400 per crossing, depending on the circumstance. I want you to think about lighting in streets. How do you address your tree lighting in the main plaza or De Leon Plaza? What you have is great. How can you make that even better? Think about accent lighting on public buildings. How do you make your public buildings special in your downtown? Enhanced bus stops are a great tool. Easy thing to take on. One fiscal year, you tackle a couple of these. Wayfinding signage is going to be hugely important. This is both within your downtown, both for pedestrians and vehicles, especially directing to publicly available parking. We kept hearing that people said there's not enough parking, there's not enough parking. Well, if you're coming down in the evenings, there's plenty of parking. You just have no idea where you're allowed to do it. So that's a huge issue that we see. Custom pole banners, that's something that is not expensive, that can really convey a great message. San Marcos does this using local artists to design their banners. And creating some of these like corner gateways, but also a big thing, cross-street string light installations, working with building owners. That can change the whole feel of a street instantly, and it's under $10,000. Especially since one of your issues that you have here in the evenings, your downtown's pretty dark in a lot of places. And you want to make sure people feel very comfortable in those spaces. Think about people that maybe are more vulnerable and how do they feel in your downtown. Me, I can walk around the downtown, I don't really care, but other people might feel differently.
He's a black belt karate, that's why.
I am definitely not that. You're gonna have to think about increasing your staffing resources. This is asking a lot of Danielle. She is feisty, but this is a lot of work for her. But there's creative ways that you can approach this. We love intern programs and Main Street programs. And build your volunteer network. Main Street fundamentally is built around volunteers. That's what makes them the strongest. So look for those opportunities to work with them. Build more partners and allies. You've got multiple higher education institutions. There's going to be cities that would be jealous of what you have with that. Use it. Looking at your sponsor programs, have really strong annual action plans where you're taking bites along the way. The biggest thing is just showing progress, no matter how small. Supporting your existing business operations, understanding their needs, doing some educational enrichment. We've provided a list to Danielle of things that we've observed with businesses in downtowns that we think could be good starting points. Communicating. Downtown standalone website is going to be important. It should link to everything, but it needs to have its own thing. Unique branding and merchandising. People will buy this stuff. And downtown-specific events and promotions calendar. We don't typically point at a big city for an example of this, but Corpus Christi's downtown actually has a really nice website where you can find everything you need within about 2 to 3 clicks. That's a good metric. With programming, think about small business fairs, pop-up spaces. We want you to sit down with businesses and come up with an action plan for hours of operation. Understand what is keeping them from being open later, because that's going to be something where they need to act together for it to get attention. Think about business plan competitions, and there's also really easy things like an open flags program, literally a flag that says open on it that you put out. That is a really important visual for people coming through downtown, that there are things open. We'd love to see a public and mural arts program here. You've got 55 artists that were at the last art walk. That's your starting list for, hey, let's talk about doing murals. We want you to talk about doing tactical approaches. These are those interim actions to test ideas. They're low cost, easy to do. Boosting foot traffic with, you've got a great driving tour, you need walking tours. These should have themes to them. You need to tell a more complete history of your city. There's all this great multicultural history here, and sometimes it gets missed in the conversation. And making your storefronts more active, looking at code education, helping people understand how to work with regulations, thinking about how your public realm operates. One of the things that we've noticed, your code is silent on a lot of things, because you do have this hands-off approach. So silent that sometimes you just need to affirm that, yes, you can do these things. That's another way you can use regulations. Think about your parking policy. We want you to look at joint parking agreements, particularly with churches, businesses that are only open during the day, so that they can convert at night and be available. We want you to think about your preservation approach. We want you to think about doing a vacant buildings program. Several cities have done that, including some near you. You need a new historic resources survey. Your historic resources survey is as old as me. You need to update that because that's going to help you update your preservation ordinances, making sure you're not catching things that you don't mean to. And then we've also included code diagnostic within the appendix of the plan, basically just focused on downtown and what we see as emerging code issues, lot standards, parking ratios, just remembering that downtown is different from the rest of your city. You know, you've got parts of downtown that are 175 plus years old. You need to remember that when you're looking at how to approach this. So what we'll be doing from here, we have put together the remaining chapters. The city staff now has a full draft copy of the plan that they're looking at. We're gonna have a final advisory committee meeting at the end of the month, and then we'll be circling back with y'all in mid-October to talk through, so you actually have the full document. We're very excited about it. We've been very intentional in making sure that there's big transformative projects and lots of little projects in between. The whole idea being, let's build momentum, let's build excitement, and let's create some pride in your downtown. So if you've got some questions or any specific things that you're curious about, we'd love to answer those.
I'll just simply add that we'll provide a copy of the full document to you with plenty of time to review prior to our October meeting. And that way you can review it in as great detail as you'd like before formally being asked to adopt it.
Thank you, Mr. Sparks.
All right.
Have you gotten an apartment here yet? Seems like you're always here.
You need one downtown.
I have crashed with friends once or twice, so yeah, it's been great coming back here.
Well, glad you're working on it for us. Well, that concludes our meeting. There's no need for an executive session.
May I say something?
Oh, sure.
I came here to talk about cats, but I've heard all this wonderful stuff, and I love this city. I came here, I was in San Diego, and I researched and found this to be the best town in America, and I still believe that.
Can we get you on a billboard saying that, or a
hey, listen,
commercial
you
or
need
something?
testimony, I'll give it to you. But I'm listening to this, and I didn't come here because of cultural things. I'm from New York City. This is never going to compete with New York. I came here from San Diego. You don't have the best beaches, but you've got some really good stuff here. And I'm not sure that a cultural place downtown is going to attract that many people. This town's not going to make money when I make pizza for you and you do my shirts. It's outside money. San Diego has the Navy, and that's how they get theirs. There's things here that can be exploited, and I didn't hear any of those things being exploited. You have history that, how are you going to get somebody to come here for vacation rather than 100 miles from here? I didn't hear anything. I heard there was going to be picnic tables, and I heard there was going to be nice streets. I'm not sure what that does. I'll tell you what it does is history. Bring people in here for the history. Advertise it. I mean, the depth of history in this part of Texas is just, it blows me. When I grew up I lived in New York, and I grew up going to Williamsburg for history. And it drew my family there all the time. You can do those kinds of things. You're not going to do that by saying, well, this is a cultural center. No, you're not going to ever compete. Everything I heard here was like you're competing on a menu with other cities that you can't compete with. But you have such fantastic, unique things here that you don't have to compete with them because they can't compete with you. Identify those things. I've got friends in California that I've convinced that gotta come out here. You know, I got a friend who wants to start, there's no rifle range here. He's gonna start a rifle range and a gun store. I got friends in Lockheed that want to take certain parts of Lockheed and come here because of the housing, the environment, the day I moved here, I had people knocking on my door saying, "Can we help you?" I came from California. That doesn't happen. I mean, there's things that are unique here that you need to nail down. And it's not about construction projects. It's not about picnic tips. I'm dying watching what happened in Navarro. I think that was a shame. But, there are things. This is a wonderful place. Identify those things. Sell those things. Tell people that there are things you can get here you can't get anywhere else.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Welcome to Victoria. We're glad you're part of it. You need to meet Dr. Shook.
Yes.
All right.
One of our historians is the reference.
Yes. Meeting adjourned.